Avalon Prescott, 32, never imagined her grandmother's funeral would unravel the web of lies her family had spun for decades. 2 years after discovering her parents had stolen $400,000 from her grandmother's trust fund, I stood in the courtroom watching them being sentenced for elder financial abuse. The family who raised me to believe blood loyalty was everything had not only betrayed Grandma but manipulated me and my sister into becoming unwitting accomplices in their scheme. Before I dive into this painful family betrayal story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you appreciate real-life drama with justice served, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more shocking family stories like this one. The support helps me continue sharing these difficult life lessons that might just help someone else recognize red flags in their own family dynamics. Growing up in the picturesque suburbs of Portland, Oregon, I believed we were the perfect American family. My parents, Richard and Diana Prescott, were respected members of the community. Dad ran a moderately successful real estate business, while Mom served as the treasurer for several local charities. My older sister, Brielle, was the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and heading to medical school. Meanwhile, I, Avalon, found my place as the creative but responsible daughter who pursued a career in financial analysis. My grandmother, Eleanor Prescott, was the family matriarch, a fiercely independent woman who had built considerable wealth through smart investments after my grandfather passed away 20 years ago. She lived in a beautiful Victorian house just 10 minutes from our family home. Growing up, Sunday dinners at Grandma Eleanor's were mandatory family gatherings, where she would regale us with stories of her travels and business ventures. She had always been particularly fond of me, often remarking that I had inherited her head for numbers and cautious approach to life. The first warning signs appeared about 5 years ago when Grandma Eleanor, then 78, started showing early signs of cognitive decline. Nothing dramatic, just occasional memory lapses and confusion about dates. My parents insisted on helping manage her finances despite my grandmother's previous meticulous handling of her own affairs. When I offered to assist, given my financial background, my father dismissed the idea, saying, "This is for the adults to handle, Avalon. You focus on your own career." The dismissal stung, but I respected their decision, believing they had Grandma's best interests at heart. During this time, I noticed subtle changes in our family dynamics. My parents began lavishing expensive gifts on Brielle, paying for a luxury apartment during her residency and a brand new BMW, while consistently reminding me that as the financially stable one, I didn't need their support. These disparities created tension between Brielle and me. Where we had once been close confidantes, we now circled each other warily at family gatherings. Brielle became increasingly dismissive of my concerns about Grandma, accusing me of being jealous of her relationship with our parents. "Maybe if you visited Grandma more instead of obsessing over your spreadsheets, Mom and Dad wouldn't have to do everything she snapped during one particularly heated Christmas dinner." What Brielle didn't know was that I had been visiting Grandma regularly, usually during weekday afternoons when everyone else was working. During these quiet visits, Grandma Eleanor would sometimes look confused about her financial arrangements. "I thought I had set aside money for both my granddaughters," she'd murmur, before my mother would appear as if summoned by some silent alarm to redirect the conversation and usher me out. As months passed, my parents' lifestyle subtly upgraded. They renovated their kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, took a 3-week European vacation, and Dad somehow acquired a collection of vintage watches he'd always coveted. When I casually asked about these expenditures, Mom laughed it off. "Your father's business is finally paying off after all these years of struggle. Can't we enjoy the fruits of our labor?" I might have believed them if not for the simultaneous complaints about helping Grandma with her dwindling resources. Dad would sigh dramatically about the financial burden of maintaining Grandma's house and healthcare, implying they were dipping into their own savings to support her. The contradiction between their apparent newfound wealth and these complaints planted seeds of suspicion in my mind. The final red flag came when I discovered that my parents had convinced Grandma to sell several valuable family heirlooms, including my grandfather's vintage car collection and my grandmother's antique jewelry items she had explicitly promised would stay in the family for generations. When I questioned this decision, my father became uncharacteristically aggressive, accusing me of interfering in matters that didn't concern me. Your grandmother made these decisions herself, Avalon. Are you suggesting we're taking advantage of her? Is that what you think of your own parents? His defensive reaction only deepened my suspicions. Something wasn't right in the perfect Prescott family, and I was beginning to see cracks in the foundation of trust I had never questioned before. Little did I know that these warning signs were merely the visible portion of a massive iceberg of betrayal lurking beneath our family's surface, one that would eventually tear apart everything I thought I knew about loyalty and blood ties. The truth emerged on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March about 3 years ago. I had taken a half-day off work to drive Grandma Eleanor to a routine doctor's appointment. Mom usually handled these, but she and Dad had conveniently scheduled a weekend getaway, leaving me to fill in. Grandma seemed more lucid than usual as we drove back to her house, commenting on landmarks and reminiscing about the neighborhood's changes over decades. You know, Avalon, she said, her voice unexpectedly clear. I've always worried about how Brielle will manage once I'm gone. That's why I set up the trust for both of you girls to make sure you'd be secure. She patted my hand, resting on the gearshift. The medical career path is so expensive, poor dear. I'm glad the first distributions have helped her through residency. I nearly swerved off the road. Distributions? From what trust, Grandma? Her brow furrowed. The Eleanor Prescott Family Trust, of course. Your parents said they've been managing the early distributions for Brielle's education and your investment portfolio. She looked confused by my obvious shock. You did receive your quarterly statements, didn't you? My heart pounded as I carefully navigated the conversation, not wanting to upset her but desperate for information. By the time we reached her house, I had learned that Grandma had established a substantial trust 3 years prior with clear instructions. The bulk would be distributed after her passing, but smaller quarterly disbursements were permitted. For educational purposes or significant life milestones for both granddaughters to be managed by my parents as trustees until Grandma's death. Let me show you the paperwork. Grandma insisted, leading me to her home office, where she kept a filing cabinet meticulously organized despite her cognitive challenges. Together we found the trust documentation complete with lawyers' signatures and official seals. My hands shook as I read through the papers. The trust was substantial, nearly $1.2 million in total assets, with explicit provisions for both Brielle and me to receive equal portions. According to the document, approximately $400,000 had already been distributed over the past 2 years. I had never seen a penny of it. After settling Grandma in with her favorite television program and a cup of tea, I discreetly photographed the key documents with my phone. That evening, instead of confronting my parents immediately, I made 2 critical phone calls. First to Theodore Williams, Grandma's longtime attorney listed on the trust documents, and then to my college friend Layla Patel, who had become a forensic accountant. Theo was shocked to hear from me. Avalon, I've been trying to reach your grandmother for months. The quarterly reports your parents have been submitting seemed irregular, but they assured me Eleanor was just traveling extensively and difficult to reach for signatures. Layla agreed to meet me the following day, reviewing the documents over lunch in her downtown office. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she examined the figures. Avalon, based on these distribution records, approximately $200,000 should have gone to each of you girls over the past 2 years. Have you received any funds at all? When I shook my head, she continued, the withdrawals align perfectly with your parents' lifestyle upgrades. You mentioned the renovation, the vacations, those vintage watches. They've been siphoning funds from both your portions. But the most devastating revelation came when Layla pointed to a series of smaller transactions. These appeared to be payments to Brielle's account. The timing corresponds with her new apartment and car. She looked up at me sympathetically. It seems your sister has been receiving some of her portion, roughly $80,000, but your parents have taken the rest, including your entire share. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had my parents stolen from their own mother, but they had deliberately created a rift between Brielle and me by making her complicit in their scheme, whether she fully understood it or not. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by printouts of trust documents, distribution schedules, and Layla's preliminary analysis. The evidence was irrefutable. My parents had systematically embezzled nearly $400,000 from Grandma's trust, favored my sister with partial payments while giving me nothing, and deliberately driven a wedge between us to prevent us from comparing notes. As the rain lashed against my windows, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would not confront them yet. Instead, I would gather more evidence, consult with legal experts, and strategize how to protect Grandma Eleanor from further exploitation. The family that had raised me to believe blood loyalty trumped everything had betrayed that very principle in the most fundamental way possible. I closed my eyes, remembering Grandma's words from my childhood. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, Avalon, like cream or bodies in a lake. It was time to let this truth rise, no matter how painful the reckoning would be. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I maintained the facade of the dutiful daughter and sister attending family dinners with a plastered-on smile, while secretly documenting every questionable comment my parents made about Grandma's finances. By night, I worked with Layla and a lawyer friend, Marcus Chen, building an airtight case of financial elder abuse. The evidence was damning. Bank records showed systematic transfers from the trust into my parents' personal accounts. Forged signatures appeared on withdrawal authorizations. Most disturbingly, we discovered that my parents had been gradually increasing Grandma's medication dosages on the days they needed her to sign documents, ensuring she remained compliant and confused. I was ready to go to the authorities when Marcus suggested one final step: confronting my family directly with witnesses present. Sometimes people will admit to things when caught red-handed, he advised. Those admissions can be crucial in legal proceedings. We planned the confrontation carefully. I invited my parents and Brielle to Grandma's house under the pretense of discussing her upcoming birthday celebration. Meanwhile, Thea Williams, Grandma's attorney and a nurse specializing in elder care, would be present along with Marcus posing as my financial advisor. The day arrived, a sunny Sunday afternoon that belied the storm about to break. My parents arrived first, instantly suspicious of the unfamiliar cars in the driveway. "What's going on?" Avalon Dad demanded as they entered the living room, his expression darkening at the sight of the suited strangers. "Please sit down," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to discuss Grandma's trust." The color drained from my mother's face. "Whatever this is, it can wait until we're alone as a family." "No, Mom, it can't," I replied, just as Brielle walked in, stopping short at the threshold as she sensed the tension. For the next hour, I methodically presented the evidence we'd gathered, watching my parents' expressions shift from denial to anger to desperate bargaining. Dad attempted to intimidate me, then tried to leave, only to find Marcus blocking the doorway. Mom dissolved into tears, claiming they had only been borrowing the money temporarily for family emergencies. But the most revealing reaction came from Brielle. As I explained how our parents had given her a portion of her trust fund while taking all of mine, her face registered genuine shock. "I thought those were gifts," she whispered, turning to our parents. You said you were helping me because medical school was so expensive and Avalon was doing fine on her own. Her voice hardened. You told me Grandma wanted it this way. Mom reached for Brielle's hand. Darling, we were just trying to protect you from the stress of "Don't touch me," Brielle recoiled, moving to stand beside me for the first time in years. You didn't just steal from Grandma. You used me to help you do it, and you turned me against my own sister. Dad's demeanor suddenly changed, his voice becoming threatening. This family discussion is over. Eleanor agreed to everything we did. It's our word against yours, and no one's going to believe you over us. That's when Grandma Eleanor, who had been quietly observing from her armchair, stood up. In that moment, she seemed to shed years of frailty, her voice ringing clear and authoritative. I believe her, Richard. And so will the police. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad lunged toward Grandma, whether to intimidate or plead with her. I'll never know, because in that moment, Theo Williams stepped forward. Mr. Prescott, as Mrs. Eleanor Prescott's attorney, I must inform you that she has signed documents removing you and your wife as trustees effective immediately. Furthermore, we have already filed a police report regarding the unauthorized withdrawals from the trust. Mom collapsed into sobs, but Dad's face contorted with rage. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. You ungrateful, scheming little, after everything we've done for you. This family protected you, supported you. No, Dad, I replied quietly. This family was supposed to love each other honestly. What you did wasn't protection. It was theft and manipulation. What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts differed. Dad lunged toward me, his face purple with fury. Brielle stepped between us instinctively. In the confusion, Dad's hand struck her face with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the coffee table, which shattered under her weight. The room froze in shocked silence, broken only by Brielle's soft gasp of pain as she touched her bleeding cheek. Richard Prescott, you are under citizen's arrest for assault, Marcus announced, his phone already recording. And financial elder abuse, he added, as Dad stood paralyzed by what he'd done. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they found a family irreparably fractured. My parents were escorted from the house in handcuffs, my mother still sobbing that they had only done what any parents would do for their children's future. Dad maintained a stony silence, refusing to even look at me or Brielle as they placed him in the police car. As the red and blue lights disappeared down the driveway, Brielle and I stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch, physically close but emotionally miles apart, bound together by a shared betrayal we were only beginning to process. Did you know? I finally asked her, my voice barely audible. Any of it? She shook her head, the bruise already forming on her cheekbone. I knew they were helping me financially. I thought it was from their savings. Her eyes, so like our father's, met mine with raw pain. I never knew they were stealing from Grandma. And I swear, Avalon, I never knew they were taking your share too. I believed her. Despite everything, I knew my sister well enough to recognize her genuine shock and horror. We had both been pawns in our parents' scheme, me cast aside, her bought off and manipulated into complicity. As we turned to go back inside to Grandma, Brielle caught my arm. Can we ever fix this, us, I mean? I had no easy answer. The betrayal had cut too deep, the manipulation too thorough. I don't know, I admitted. But maybe we start by protecting Grandma the way our parents should have. It was a beginning, however fragile. The long road of legal proceedings, family therapy, and rebuilding trust stretched before us with no guarantee of where it might lead. I hope you're finding this story as compelling as it is heartbreaking. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind, doesn't it? If you're connecting with Avalon's journey, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this complicated family drama unfolds. I'd love to know if you've ever had to stand up against family members who cross serious boundaries. Share your thoughts in the comments below while we continue with Avalon's story. The months following the confrontation transformed into a grueling legal marathon none of us were prepared for. What I had naively imagined would be a straightforward case of financial fraud became a twisted labyrinth of family secrets, courtroom drama, and devastating revelations. My parents hired Elliot Vandenberg, one of the city's most aggressive defense attorneys, known for his scorched earth approach to family disputes. Their defense strategy quickly became clear. Paint me as a resentful daughter, jealous of my sister's success, portray Grandma Eleanor as mentally incompetent, despite medical evidence to the contrary, and claim that all financial transactions had been done with her full knowledge and blessing. Your Honor, my clients were simply following Eleanor Prescott's explicit wishes to provide additional support to their daughter Brielle during her expensive medical training. Vandenberg argued during an early hearing. Ms. Stenenberg of her daughter Brielle during an early hearing. Avalon Prescott's accusations stem from a lifelong rivalry with her more accomplished sister. These character assassinations were painful enough, but what truly blindsided me was discovering that my parents had been systematically alienating me from our extended family for years. Aunts, uncles, and cousins approached me in courthouse hallways, confused by stories my parents had told them, that I had gambling debts, that I was unstable, that I had tried to manipulate Grandma into changing her will in my favor. These preemptive strikes had been their insurance policy against exactly the situation we now found ourselves in. The legal proceedings exposed other shocking betrayals. Financial forensics revealed my parents had been embezzling from Grandma's accounts for nearly 5 years, beginning long before her cognitive decline. They had systematically isolated her from her friends under the guise of protecting her from people who might take advantage while they themselves pillaged her resources. Most devastating was discovering that my father had coerced Grandma into signing over the deed to her beloved Victorian home, the house where my grandfather had died, where she had intended to live out her days. The property had been quietly listed for sale just weeks before our confrontation, with the proceeds intended to fund my parents' early retirement to Arizona. Throughout these revelations, Brielle and I attempted to rebuild our fractured relationship. The shared trauma of our parents' betrayal created a tentative bridge between us, but years of manufactured rivalry couldn't be dismantled overnight. I believed them when they said you were too busy for family. Brielle confessed during one late-night conversation at Grandma's kitchen table. They told me you resented having to visit Grandma, that you complained about it constantly. And they told me you were too preoccupied with your career to care about her, I replied, the parallel manipulation becoming clear. Our parents had created elaborate contradicting narratives, ensuring we would never compare notes or unite against them. It was a calculated division that had worked perfectly until now. 6 months into the legal battle, we faced another crisis when Grandma Eleanor suffered a minor stroke, likely triggered by the stress of courtroom testimony. As she recovered in the hospital, my parents attempted to use her condition to further their defense. This entire lawsuit has jeopardized Mrs. Prescott's health. Vandenberg declared dramatically in court. If her granddaughters truly cared about her well-being, they would drop these vindictive proceedings and allow this family to heal privately. It was during Grandma's hospital stay that we discovered perhaps the most insidious aspect of my parents' scheme. Among Grandma's medications, a nurse identified several that weren't prescribed by her doctors, subtle sedatives that would have enhanced her confusion and made her more compliant. Toxicology tests confirmed these substances had been in her system for months, carefully administered to keep her docile without raising medical suspicions. This evidence transformed the case from financial fraud to elder abuse with criminal implications. The district attorney's office took a more active interest, and suddenly, my parents faced not just civil penalties but potential incarceration. As Grandma recovered, she insisted on testifying one final time against the advice of her doctors and lawyers. I will never forget the sight of her in that witness stand, diminutive but dignified, facing her own daughter and son-in-law without flinching. I trusted you with everything, she told them, her voice unwavering despite her physical frailty. Not just my money, but my granddaughter's future security. You didn't just steal from me, you stole from them, and you stole their relationship with each other. That is the crime I cannot forgive. My mother wept silently. My father stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. For the first time, I glimpsed not the confident parents who had raised me, but two desperate people who had rationalized their betrayal so completely they could no longer recognize it for what it was. The judge's ruling came down like a hammer. My parents were found guilty on multiple counts of financial elder abuse, fraud, and misappropriation of fiduciary funds. The civil judgment required full restitution of the stolen $400,000 plus punitive damages. The criminal charges carried potential prison sentences that would be determined in a separate proceeding. Outside the courthouse after the verdict, reporters clustered around us, hungry for soundbites about the family scandal. Brielle and I flanked Grandma Eleanor, protectively declining to comment beyond a simple statement I had prepared. Today, justice was served, but no legal verdict can repair the trust that was broken. We ask for privacy as our family begins the long process of healing. As cameras flashed around us, Brielle squeezed my hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. We had a long road ahead, navigating the aftermath of a betrayal that had fundamentally altered our understanding of family. The money could be restored, but the innocence and trust we had lost might never fully return. That evening, as we settled Grandma Eleanor back into her home, now legally secured against any further attempts to sell it, she beckoned me to sit beside her on the porch swing that had been my favorite spot since childhood. Your grandfather always said there were two kinds of wealth, she murmured, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood gold. The kind you can count and the kind that counts. We've lost some of the first kind, but maybe gained something of the second. As the legal chapter of our ordeal drew to a close, the harder work of emotional recovery was just beginning. The family we had been no longer existed. In its place stood something fragile and undefined, waiting to be rebuilt from the ruins of betrayal. Wow, I know this family drama is getting intense. Can you believe what Avalon and her sister discovered about their parents? If you're enjoying this journey of betrayal and justice, please hit that like button right now to help others find this story. I'm curious, has anyone ever had to testify against a family member in court? Let me know in the comments below. While we continue with Avalon's incredible story of standing up for what's right, even when it means confronting those closest to you. In the immediate aftermath of the trial, our family splintered completely. My parents, awaiting their criminal sentencing hearing, retreated into a bubble of denial and self-justification. They gave tear-filled interviews to local media outlets, painting themselves as misunderstood parents who had only wanted to manage the family resources efficiently. They established a GoFundMe campaign for their legal expenses that was promptly reported and removed. The most surreal moment came when my mother sent a group text to extended family members, claiming that Brielle and I had been brainwashed by liberal lawyers and that they would eventually be vindicated. The desperate message included a Bible verse about honoring one's parents without a hint of irony regarding their own dishonoring of Grandma Eleanor. Their sentencing hearing was scheduled for 4 months after the civil judgment. During that time, Brielle and I focused on reorganizing Grandma's care and financial arrangements. We established a new trust with an independent court-approved trustee, ensuring transparent management of her remaining assets. The court ordered our parents to begin repayment of the stolen funds immediately, resulting in the forced sale of their home and most of their possessions. Watching my childhood home being emptied for an estate sale created complicated emotions I hadn't anticipated. Each item carried memories: the dining table where we'd celebrated birthdays, the porch swing where Dad had once read stories to us, the piano Mom had insisted I learn despite my lack of talent. These physical remnants of happier times were being dispersed to strangers, much like the family bonds they represented. "Do you want to keep anything?" Brielle asked as we supervised the inventory process, maintaining our legal obligation to ensure all valuable items were properly assessed for restitution. I considered the question, scanning the familiar rooms. "Just the photo albums," I finally decided. "Not for them, but for us. So we remember there were good times too." Brielle nodded, understanding perfectly. "To remember who we thought they were." The criminal sentencing arrived on a crisp autumn day. The courtroom was more crowded than for previous hearings, filled with curious onlookers drawn by the local media coverage of the trust fund betrayal, as one newspaper had dramatically labeled it. My parents appeared haggard, the months of stress etched visibly on their faces. Judge Harriet Watkins, a stern woman in her 60s, delivered a scathing assessment before announcing their sentences. "The court considers elder financial abuse among the most reprehensible of nonviolent crimes," she stated, peering over her reading glasses at my parents. "The victims are vulnerable individuals who should be able to trust their family members implicitly. Mrs. Prescott placed her faith in her daughter and son-in-law, and they systematically exploited that faith while simultaneously destroying the relationship between their own children through manipulation and lies." She sentenced my father to 4 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 18 months. My mother received 3 years eligible for parole after 12 months. Both sentences were on the higher end of the sentencing guidelines, reflecting the judge's disgust at the calculated nature of their betrayal. As bailiffs led them away, my mother turned toward us in the gallery, her expression pleading. My father kept his eyes forward, his back rigid with unrepentant pride. Neither Brielle nor I rose to approach them. Whatever closure we might need would not come from this moment or from them. Outside the courthouse, Grandma Eleanor took both our hands in hers. "It's done," she said simply. "Now we begin again." Beginning again proved more challenging than any of us anticipated. Grandma's health, though stabilized, had been permanently affected by the prolonged stress and medication tampering. We arranged for part-time in-home care, allowing her to remain in her beloved Victorian house while ensuring her safety and comfort. Brielle and I faced our own adjustment challenges. She took a leave of absence from her medical residency, the revelations about our parents having triggered a profound reassessment of her career and life choices. "I went into medicine partly because they pushed me toward it," she confessed, during one of our new ritual Sunday dinners at Grandma's. "I'm not even sure if it's what I truly want." I encouraged her to see a therapist, a step I had already taken to process my own complicated grief and betrayal. "We've spent our whole lives trying to be who they wanted," I told her. "Maybe it's time to figure out who we actually are." The hardest part was navigating our relationship with each other. Years of manufactured competition and resentment couldn't be erased overnight despite the revelation of our parents' manipulation. We often found ourselves slipping into old patterns of defensiveness and suspicion, then having to consciously pull back and remind ourselves that those reactions had been programmed into us deliberately. 3 months after the sentencing, we received the first of what would become regular letters from our mother in prison. Filled with religious references and vague apologies for any misunderstandings, these communications revealed that she remained incapable of truly acknowledging the harm they had caused. My father never wrote. "Do you think they'll ever really understand what they did?" Brielle asked after we received a particularly self-serving letter in which our mother claimed to be offering up her suffering for the family's healing. "I don't think so," I replied honestly. "They've convinced themselves they were entitled to Grandma's money and justified in keeping us apart. That level of self-deception doesn't dissolve easily, even in prison." The restitution process moved slowly. My parents' assets covered less than half of what they had stolen, with the remainder to be paid through garnishment of any future earnings after their release. We knew we might never recover the full amount, but the financial loss had become secondary to the emotional damage that no court could address. Despite these challenges, unexpected positive developments emerged from the ruins of our family structure. Brielle decided to switch from her surgical specialty to geriatric medicine, inspired by Grandma Eleanor's experience and the broader issues of elder care it had illuminated. I discovered a passion for financial literacy education, volunteering with community organizations to help seniors protect themselves from exploitation. Most significantly, Brielle and I gradually rediscovered the sisterhood that had been systematically dismantled throughout our lives. It began with small gestures, sharing an inside joke, defending each other, to questioning relatives, collaborating on Grandma's care without power struggles. Slowly, we built a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than competition, recognizing in each other the strengths our parents had taught us to resent. 1 year after the sentencing, we commemorated what we jokingly called our Family Independence Day with a small gathering at Grandma's house. Theo Williams came along with Layla and Marcus, the professionals who had helped us expose the truth, but had since become genuine friends. Grandma insisted on cooking her famous pot roast despite her limited mobility, supervising from her wheelchair as Brielle and I followed her instructions in the kitchen. As we sat around the dining table that evening, sharing stories and laughter, I was struck by the realization that we had created something new and authentic from the wreckage of betrayal. This makeshift family, bound not by obligation or blood loyalty, but by choice and shared experience, felt more genuine than anything I had known before. To truth, Grandma Eleanor proposed a toast, raising her glass with a slightly trembling hand. However painful, it's always better than comfortable lies. We clinked glasses in agreement, embracing the difficult wisdom we had all earned at too high a price. 18 months into my parents' incarceration, we received news that upended our tentative new normal. My father had suffered a severe heart attack in prison and was being transferred to the medical wing in critical condition. As his next of kin, Brielle and I were notified and faced an immediate dilemma whether to visit the man who had betrayed us so completely. "I don't know if I can face him," Brielle admitted, as we sat in my apartment discussing the situation. "But I also don't know if I can live with myself if he dies," and I never what I asked when she trailed off. "Forgave him, heard an apology, got closure." She shrugged helplessly. "I don't even know. Maybe just, I saw him one more time as our father, rather than as defendant." Number 47392. After much deliberation, we decided to visit, not out of obligation or forgiveness, but from a desire to reclaim our agency in the relationship. We would see him on our terms, not responding to a manipulative summons or crisis he had engineered. The prison medical facility was a sterile, depressing place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Dad looked shockingly diminished in the hospital bed, his once commanding presence reduced to a pale, thin figure attached to monitoring equipment. For a moment, I felt a surge of the daughter instinct to comfort and protect him, a reaction I had to consciously set aside. His eyes widened in genuine surprise when we entered. "You came," he whispered, his voice weak. "We did," I confirmed, neutrally, neither warm nor cold. "The doctors say you had a major heart attack." He nodded slightly, wincing with the movement. "They're recommending bypass surgery." "The prison healthcare system." He trailed off, perhaps realizing complaints about his circumstances would not garner sympathy. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. What does one say to a father who systematically betrayed his mother and children? The usual hospital platitudes, "You'll be fine, we're here for you," felt dishonest, yet outright hostility seemed equally inappropriate given his vulnerable state. Finally, Brielle spoke. "Why did you do it, Dad, really? Not the excuses you gave in court or the justifications, the actual truth. To our astonishment, whether due to his medical crisis or the stark setting, he didn't deflect. It started small, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, taking small amounts to cover business losses. Then, it became easier each time. The line between borrowing and taking blurred. He paused, breathing laboriously. After a while, I convinced myself it was rightfully ours anyway, that your grandmother would have wanted us to have it now rather than later. And turning us against each other, I pressed. Was that just collateral damage? His eyes briefly met mine before darting away. That was strategic. If you two compared notes, you might realize what was happening. It was easier to manage you separately. The rawness of his admissions stunned us both into silence. Not because of the content we had already pieced together this rationale, but because he had finally spoken an unvarnished truth. No justifications, no self-righteousness, just the stark reality of his calculated betrayal. Is Mom getting the same clarity in prison? Brielle asked, her voice tight with emotion. Dad shook his head slightly. Your mother still believes we were doing what was best for the family. I found a community of women there who reinforced that perspective. I wasn't surprised. Mom had always been more skilled at self-deception, wrapping even her worst actions in a veneer of maternal sacrifice. As our visit drew to a close, Dad reached for my hand. I allowed the contact, briefly feeling the unfamiliar frailty of his fingers. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. But I want you both to know that what you did, exposing us, protecting your grandmother, it was brave. More courageous than anything I've done in my life. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was perhaps the closest thing to respect he had offered either of us in years. We left the medical wing with complicated emotions. Neither of us felt the catharsis movies promise from deathbed reconciliations, but something had shifted subtly. We had faced him not as victimized daughters seeking approval, but as adults who had made difficult ethical choices despite the personal cost. 3 days later, Dad underwent successful bypass surgery. We sent flowers but didn't visit again during his recovery. Some boundaries once established served a purpose beyond punishment. Meanwhile, another unexpected development emerged from an unlikely source. A journalist named Vanessa Liu, who had covered our family's legal battle for a local newspaper, approached us about featuring our story in a documentary about elder financial abuse. Her research had revealed that such cases were dramatically underreported nationwide, with family members being the most common perpetrators. Your grandmother's willingness to pursue justice despite family ties made this case unusual, Vanessa explained over coffee. Most victims remain silent out of shame or misplaced loyalty. Grandma Eleanor surprised us by enthusiastically embracing the project. If my humiliation can prevent someone else's, it will have been worth something, she declared. The documentary process proved unexpectedly therapeutic. Articulating our experiences to Vanessa's cameras helped crystallize lessons that had been obscured by emotional fog. Brielle spoke eloquently about the insidious nature of family manipulation. I detailed the financial warning signs others should watch for. Grandma Eleanor, despite her physical frailty, delivered a powerful message about maintaining independence and trusting one's instincts even when family members insist otherwise. As filming progressed, we received word that our mother had petitioned for early release on compassionate grounds to support her husband through his medical crisis. The request was denied based on her continued minimization of her offenses, as noted in her psychological evaluations. She would serve her full sentence. 2 years after our parents' sentencing life had established new patterns. Grandma Eleanor had good days and bad, but her mental clarity had improved significantly once freed from the subtle sedation my parents had administered. Brielle completed her residency and accepted a position at a geriatric care facility where she could apply her hard-won insights about elder vulnerability. I had partnered with Theo Williams to establish a nonprofit focused on financial literacy and protection for seniors. The documentary titled Blood and Money When Family Trust Breaks Down premiered at a small film festival and was subsequently picked up by a streaming service. Its release generated hundreds of emails from viewers who recognized similar patterns in their own families, many thanking us for giving them the courage to investigate concerning situations with elderly relatives. One evening, as Grandma Brielle and I watched the sunset from the porch of the Victorian house, now legally protected by an irrevocable trust, ensuring it would pass directly to us upon Grandma's death, Eleanor took our hands in hers. "You know what I've learned from all this," she mused. "Family isn't about blind loyalty. It's about honoring the truth in each other, even when it's inconvenient." Brielle and I exchanged glances over her silver head, silently acknowledging how far we'd come from the manipulated rivals our parents had cultivated. The trust between us remained tender in places like a healed bone that aches before rain, but it was authentic in a way our previous relationship never had been. In an ironic twist, the trauma that had been intended to divide us permanently had instead forged a resilient bond based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than obligatory blood ties. 5 years after the day I discovered my grandmother's trust had been plundered, I stood in the driveway of her Victorian home watching movers carefully load her antique furniture into a truck. The house, the physical epicenter of our family drama, was being sold not out of financial necessity, but as a deliberate choice to close one chapter and begin another. Grandma Eleanor, now 83, had decided to relocate to a senior living community that offered the perfect balance of independence and support. "This house has seen enough Prescott family secrets," she declared with characteristic frankness. "Let it witness some other family's joy for a change." The timing felt symbolically appropriate. My father had been released from prison 6 months earlier, having served his full sentence, minus time off for good behavior. My mother would follow in another 3 months. They had both been legally prohibited from contacting Grandma Eleanor and had largely respected that boundary, though occasional messages still came through extended family members. The years had brought unexpected resolutions in ways none of us could have anticipated. Dad's heart attack had catalyzed a genuine, if limited, reckoning with his actions. Through a prison counselor, he had sent us letters that tracked his gradual understanding of the damage he had caused, not just financially, but to the fabric of trust that should define family relationships. Mom's evolution had been slower and more complicated. Her prison correspondence remained heavily focused on her own suffering and religious conversion, though recent letters showed glimmers of genuine reflection on her role in the betrayal. Brielle and I had established firm boundaries about future contact with our parents. We would meet them in public places only with professional support if needed, and any relationship would develop based on their continued accountability rather than automatic forgiveness granted out of familial obligation. "They'll be starting over with nothing," Brielle observed as we supervised the packing of Grandma's treasured photo albums, carefully curated now to exclude images that would trigger painful memories. "So are we in many ways," I replied. "The difference is, we're building on truth rather than deception." The restitution payments had continued sporadically managed through the court system to avoid direct contact. The trust had been made whole through a combination of these payments and the liquidation of our parents' remaining assets. More importantly, the documentary had sparked a national conversation about elder financial abuse, leading to legislative initiatives in several states to strengthen protections and penalties. Grandma Eleanor's transition to Willow Creek Retirement Community marked a new phase for all of us. Her apartment there was spacious and filled with natural light overlooking gardens, where she could continue her lifelong love of horticulture without the physical demands of maintaining a large property. The community offered social activities, cultural outings, and on-site medical support when needed. I should have done this years ago, she admitted, during her housewarming gathering, which we kept intentionally small. I stayed in that house partly out of stubbornness, and partly from fear of losing independence. Now I realize that true independence comes from making proactive choices, not just clinging to the status quo. Her wisdom, hard-earned through betrayal and recovery, had become the cornerstone of our rebuilt family identity. As for Brielle and me, our relationship had evolved in ways neither of us could have imagined during those days of manufactured rivalry. We had moved beyond merely healing the artificial divide our parents created to discovering an authentic sisterhood based on shared values and complementary strengths. Brielle's work in geriatric medicine had expanded to include advocacy for elder rights within the healthcare system. My financial literacy programs for seniors had grown into a statewide initiative with government funding. Together, we occasionally presented at conferences about elder abuse prevention, sharing our personal experience alongside professional expertise. On the day of Grandma's move, after the movers had departed with her belongings, and we were doing a final walkthrough of the empty Victorian, Brielle discovered something tucked behind a loose baseboard in what had been our grandfather's study, a small leather-bound journal. That evening, settled in Grandma's new apartment with tea and cookies, we presented this unexpected find to her. "Your grandfather's journal," she whispered, running her fingers over the worn cover. "I thought it was lost decades ago." Together we read entries dating back to the early years of their marriage, including reflections on the births of their children and grandchildren. One passage written shortly before his death caught my attention. "Family wealth is a double-edged sword. It can provide security and opportunity, but it can also reveal character flaws that might otherwise remain dormant. I worry sometimes about how our savings will affect the next generations. Will they see it as a responsibility or an entitlement? Eleanor and I have tried to instill values above valuables, but time will tell if we've succeeded." Grandma Eleanor wiped away tears. "He would have been so disappointed in Diana and Richard," she said, referring to my parents by their first names, as she had done since the betrayal came to light. "But so proud of you two." In that moment, I realized that the true inheritance my grandfather had intended wasn't the money in the trust, it was the values that had guided Brielle and me to protect his wife when his daughter had failed to do so. We had proven ourselves worthy of a legacy more valuable than any financial bequest. 6 months after Grandma's relocation, we faced the moment we had been simultaneously dreading and preparing for our mother's release from prison. By then, our father had established himself in a small apartment in another city, working a modest job and respecting our boundaries by communicating only through his parole officer and court-appointed therapist. Mom's re-entry was more complicated. Without the humbling experience of a health crisis, she emerged with her self-justifications largely intact, expecting emotional support and immediate reintegration into our lives. Her first unsupervised message to me included the phrase, "Now that this unfortunate chapter is behind us, we can begin rebuilding our family the way God intended." It took several difficult conversations, some mediated by professionals, to establish that there was no going back to a family structure that had been built on manipulation and lies. Any future relationship would need to be constructed from scratch based on genuine accountability and respect for autonomy. Today, 3 years after Mom's release, we maintain limited contact with both parents. Dad has shown surprising growth, acknowledging his actions without expectation of forgiveness, and respecting our need for distance. Mom fluctuates between genuine remorse and frustrated entitlement, making consistent relationship impossible but occasional positive interactions achievable. Grandma Eleanor, now approaching her mid-80s, has flourished in her community, becoming something of a local celebrity following the documentary's success. She speaks openly about her experience turning personal humiliation into educational opportunity with remarkable grace. As for Brielle and me, we have discovered that true family is not defined by blind loyalty or shared DNA, but by mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to uphold shared values even at personal cost. The betrayal that was meant to divide us permanently instead taught us to recognize manipulation and stand firm against it together. Last month, I received an email from a woman in Arizona whose elderly father had been financially exploited by her brother. "Your documentary gave me the courage to intervene," she wrote. "It's been painful and messy, but Dad is safe now, and that's what matters." Messages like these remind me that even the most painful family traumas can yield unexpected purpose when their lessons are shared openly. The $400,000 my parents stole has long since been accounted for in financial terms, but its true value may lie in the countless elders protected because we chose truth over comfortable silence. This morning, Brielle called with news that she's been offered a position heading a new elder protection unit at the state's largest hospital system, a role created partly in response to advocacy sparked by our story. As we celebrated her achievement, I reflected on Grandma Eleanor's words from years ago: "The truth has a way of rising to the surface." In our case, the painful truth that rose like a body in a lake has ultimately created ripples of protection and awareness far beyond our family's boundaries, a legacy more meaningful than any trust fund could have provided. Wow, what an incredible journey this has been. I can't thank you enough for sticking with Avalon's story until the end. Has this family betrayal and path to justice resonated with you? I'd love to know if you've ever experienced a situation where family karma came back around in your life, whether it was justice served or lessons learned. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found value in this story about standing up for what's right, even when it means confronting your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories with powerful lessons. Sharing this video might help someone else recognize the warning signs of family manipulation or elder abuse in their own life. Thank you again for being part of this community where we can explore these difficult but important family dynamics together. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and I'll be back next week with another story that might just change how you see your own relationships. Until then, remember that sometimes the family we choose can be more authentic than the one we're born into.